Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte. This is the podcast which asks the tricky questions about the world around us. I'm George, and today we're asking, can a business make money and do good at the same time? Thank you so much for downloading this episode of The Green Room. You can find all of our previous episodes on our website, which is deloitte.co.uk/Green Room Podcasts. And today it's episode 32, which is the big question is, can a business make money and do good at the same time? So we're talking about all things responsible business, what it is, what does it mean, and why it's important. But who better to help me out with this than one of the most responsible people I know, Ethan Worth. How are you, Ethan?
Feeling a little irresponsible, George, but feeling good, feeling giddy. Sun's out, Euros are on. Probably worth noting we're recording this before England inevitably get knocked out and my mood goes back down. But yeah, happy to be back in the virtual Green Room studio.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a while, but great to have you back, Ethan. And I think you've got tackling a really important topic today, and I think. Over the last couple of years, there's been a real shift of people's sort of, their expectations of how businesses should operate and conduct their business has really translated quite well over the last few years. So we're going to dive into that today and learn all about what it means to be a responsible business and whether it is possible for a business to make money and do good at the same time. But Ethan, we obviously need some guests to help us with this. Who do we have in the studio today?
Well, George, we have two stellar CVs with us today, starting with Natalie Campbell. She is an award-winning social entrepreneur and broadcaster. She is co-CEO of Belu Water, a drinks business that puts people and the environment first. She is a strategic advisor to Stonehage Fleming and Percent and holds a number of public appointments and non-executive positions related to leadership and inclusive economic growth. Hi, Natalie.
Hi, thanks very much for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us. We also have Claire Burton. Claire is head of responsible business at Deloitte UK. Her award-winning team is responsible for delivering Deloitte's 5 Million Futures programme, which focuses on breaking down barriers to education and employment. In her role, Claire is responsible for all of Deloitte's volunteering, fundraising and pro bono activity. Hi, Claire.
Hi, Ethan. Great to be here today. Looking forward to the conversation.
Me too. And we usually kick off with an icebreaker just to get to know each other a little better. Yes, and it's just popped up in my chat. So the icebreaker is, what is your most frequently used emoji? I'll have to get my phone out and have a little look.
I don't mind going in first on this one. I think I've spoken about my daughter who's nearly 6 now. But she is a massive unicorn fan. So the unicorn emoji is a very, very popular one on my devices. And my youngest daughter is actually going against the grain a little bit, and she's very much into dinosaurs. So I've got unicorns and dinosaurs filling up my emoji feed all the time. So.
I can follow that with something that's probably less positive about my children. I think mine is the horror face, the one with the big eyes.
The scream
I use
face,
it a lot with my two small, referring to my two small boys and whatever they've done that day.
Nice.
I'm going to jump in. So mine is the eye roll emoji, usually at myself or something that has happened. And at the moment, I'm obsessed with process and inefficiencies. And I think lots of people haven't quite figured out that we're in a virtual world. And so there are things that can be done digitally, like conveyancing, for example. And so lots of eye roll emojis float around my friends.
Yeah, I think I've just checked my phone and I have probably 2 emojis at the top. One is the crying laughing face and the other is just the crying face. I think that sums up the 2 kind of moods in the pandemic quite well.
All right, Natalie, Claire, thank you so much. All right, let's dive into this week's big question. And I think, it would be really interesting or really helpful for us if perhaps you could each give a quick overview of your careers to date around corporate social responsibility, responsible business, however you describe it. And I think actually that would be really helpful just to get a big context for our listeners. Natalie, do you want to give a quick overview of how you came to your role?
Yeah, and so I think, moving to pre-work, I have always wanted to make a difference and give back. And being a young girl from Northwest London, there was always the idea of creating opportunities for more young girls from Northwest London to sit around leadership tables. So that's always been in the background of my career and the work that I do. And through entrepreneurship, which is where I started. So I opened my first business at the age of 19, had a retail franchise at 21 in my last year of university, and then did lots of weird and wonderful things as a older millennial with a love of the portfolio life. Literally did 10 things at once. I landed at Belu Water, and it's the perfect mix of running a business that is totally commercial. We're a social enterprise, but we exist to disrupt the drinks industry and to really put a mirror up to practices that it should be far more environmentally friendly, that should be sustainable, whilst also showing that you can give all of your money away in pursuit of a better world. And for me, it's almost like the landing spot of a career of trying to prove that you can make money and do good.
That really sets the scene nicely, actually. And Claire, perhaps you can talk a bit about your sort of career history and how you came to your role now.
Yeah, like Natalie, actually, this came to me from a kind of really young age. My parents talk about, I watched a Great Ormond Street advert and was absolutely traumatized from watching it, and then decided to set up a fair in my garden to make some money for them. And I raised the grand total of £3.20, I think. And I went down to what was a local Midland bank then, and paid it in. And I got a letter from them every year. And I remember how much that made an impact on me as a child. Fast forwarding, I did geography at university, human geography. So I've always been really interested in broader society and how we operate. I then joined KPMG, their management consulting graduate scheme, but in public sector. So did a huge amount of work around basic skills in adults, and then moved into doing a lot of work with police forces around how they could improve their processes. But then the London Olympics came to town, and I was really passionate about that as an opportunity for London and an opportunity to make a real difference. So I joined the organising committee. I worked in their education team and helped corporate sponsors think about how the games could be a real force for good in terms of educating young people. And then 10 years ago, one of those sponsors and partners, and a great opportunity came up. And so I joined Deloitte. And 10 years later, here I am kind of leading the team and helping Deloitte think about how it can be the best possible business it can be. A slightly different career to Natalie, but definitely had sort of social impact at the heart.
Yeah, you both have these amazing backgrounds, and it's great how you can trace it back from when you were younger, this passion. And I think the other thing that's interesting is they're both slightly different twists on what it means to be a responsible business. So I guess it might be good to start at the beginning. And what do you think it does mean to be a responsible business?
I'll try and tackle that one. And I think that's a really hard question to answer, Ethan, because it is so dependent on what your business is, I think. But I think if I was to kind of summarize, I think it's about thinking about how you can be a force for good and how what you do is to the better of society and minimizing the negative impact that you have as an organization. And that could be in a whole variety of different ways, from your supply chain through to who you employ. But I think the way to hold yourself to account is always to ask yourself, is this for the good of society that I'm doing this? Natalie, I don't know if you'd agree with me there.
Yeah, so my version is really goes beyond thinking about the widgets and actually giving a damn about everything that goes into getting the widget out to said customer. So yes, absolutely, the supply chain, but the people that you employ, the community that you operate from and within, the materials that go into making said widget, and just asking the question, am I doing everything I possibly can to ensure that no one is suffering as a result of what is happening to produce the widget? And I'm going to make a book one day just called The Widget and start from there, because lots of people try and make responsible business or CSR or ESG, turn it into this really complicated thing. And if you just distill it down to give me one thing that you sell, and let's map everything related to that and look at where you can start to do better and really be that force for good, then most people go, oh yeah, there is something that I can do, and there are changes that I can make. And then let's bring it back to the money. I'm going to say the old world of business was ultimately about ensuring other people became wealthy. And so businesses that are geared towards shareholder value, I think in this new world of responsible business, will think about all stakeholders, and they will include the environment in the equation as well, and start to think about how in generating revenue and generating profit, other elements are considered beyond shareholders. And that's what we've done at Belu. We changed our articles at the start of this year. So our primary objects are to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals of 6, 12 and 13, so related to WASH, sustainable consumption and climate action, which as a CEO, to have that as my sort of metric means that I get up every morning. And yes, I'm looking at the numbers, especially in a COVID year, running a business that faces into the hospitality industry. But I'm also thinking about how every decision we make enables us to live the credentials that we have. And there are trade-offs within that in terms of things we won't do. And that for me is the responsible business element of it. Yes, we sell water. Yes, we sell tonics and mixers. Yes, we sell filtration machines. That's our widget. But it's everything else that swirls around that really enables us to show up as the good business we are.
I was just thinking, I read something the other day around, I don't know if you're familiar, Natalie, with the Better Businesses Act campaign, which is exactly trying to do that, help update the Companies Act and make shareholders and directors think about how they are balancing people, planet and profit, and thinking about those three things in a kind of balanced equilibrium, rather than, okay, yeah, we're focused on money at the moment, and we'll do a bit of good over here, and how can we make those things all work together? So I really strongly think that business is starting to change already, but will be changing even more as things like this start to gain traction.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And we've signed up to the Better Business Act. And what I think is great about the movement, and I think there are currently about 600 organizations and businesses signed up, is that it's a really clear framework of what you can do to change. And so if you start with your governance, if you start with legals, if you start with ownership, then everything else becomes easier. Having a framework in place really does give people clarity. And I think that's where we possibly, Claire and I have been in the sort of the movement for a while. There wasn't a lot of clarity and lots of time spent looking at definitions of things. Actually, now we have absolute clarity in terms of what it means to be responsible.
And I think that's a really important point just to sort of reflect on a little bit, because I've been, I'll round it down. I've been working for 10 years, bit more than that probably, but I've been saying that for a few years now. But I think and I work in public relations as my sort of day job, and it was always CSR was this little bit of an afterthought back then. A nice to have. Let's whack out a press release talking about this fun run we've done or whatever it is. But what's happened in that period? Why is it now such an integral part of business? And as you said, Natalie, it's about focusing all efforts around that singular responsible business point, isn't it? That ethos. What's changed in that period where it's now a sort of standing item on a C-suite agenda?
I think for me, actually, it's customers. Businesses are shaped by their customers, by their investors, and they are starting to, the younger generation is much more socially aware than, say, even my generation ever was. So they are driving different types of behavior. They are making their decisions about who they work for based on things that aren't just driven by how much money they're going to take home at the end of the day. Actually, they want to work for an organization that they really care about, that they can see is passionately committed to doing good in society. So they're kind of voting with their feet in terms of organizations. So I think there has been a lot of push on organizations from that perspective. But I also think there's been a growing awakening that if companies aren't doing this, they're not going to survive. And there's loads of examples of where that hasn't happened. You know, a great example actually quite recently with the Super Club Football League. So 5 football clubs that decided to, you know, break away, create this European Super League, predominantly to make more money. And the backlash was enormous. And so they're not doing it. So I think examples like that really show that companies now need to think really holistically about what they're there for, what their purpose is, and what they're trying to achieve. And minimizing all of that negative outcomes is a key part of doing that.
Yeah, I agree. I would start with where I've seen shift is where people have realized that, you know, it starts with self-preservation, and that is absolutely okay. If the only reason you're getting on board with this is because you realize that the company won't exist in 10 years, absolutely fine. Because movement is better than no movement at all. And so in the drinks industry, if there is no water, if there are no raw materials, if there isn't infrastructure to be able to produce said drink, there is no business. And so you're seeing people starting to talk about preservation of water, preservation of raw material, and. I also think talent and retention. So I think that a leadership generation were more content to work, earn a living, and almost have work life and a home life. I think new talent coming through want to live one life, and they want to enjoy the work that they do. They want to make a difference. They want to earn a good wage to then be a responsible person within a community. And the things that have fed that up, obviously the pandemic year and a bit that we've had, I think Brexit has changed that for a lot of people. I think the political sensibility around the world has shifted that thinking for a lot of people. And then when you then bring it to the customer, as Claire has said, lots of brands before, and I've been in the room when this conversation has come up, said, you know, the customer doesn't know what they want. We can influence their thinking. I think actually with the evolution of social media, people can explore, get under the skin of a brand, test what they're saying in real time. And so lots more brands don't have anywhere to hide if they're making a big announcement about a thing that they're doing. You mentioned the fun run. The fun run is no longer enough. That's the bare minimum of what a company should be doing. And social media is a place where individuals are calling this out. And we know that one individual can create a groundswell of movement, which can topple a share price overnight. And so it goes back to that self-preservation.
I think that accountability point's really interesting. And I suppose actually looking back over the last decade, one thing that has increased over that time is that social media world has sort of exploded, hasn't it? And actually we published some research early in the year of a survey of 2,000 UK consumers, and 1 in 3 said that they stopped purchasing certain brands or products because of ethical or sustainability concerns they had about that brand or product. So you can capture this movement already, can't you? Which is quite interesting.
And Claire, I think the Super League example was really interesting around kind of how not to do it. Do either of you have any examples of brands where you think, yeah, they really are a responsible business, they know how to do it, other than Belu, of course? Other than Belu.
So I'm going to jump in with Ocean Bottle. And so full disclosure, they are a partner. And so Ocean Bottle started from the premise of, if you're on the go and you need a hot or cold drink, you should have a refillable, and therefore we can cut down on single use. But instead of following the model of what was currently on the market, which is ultimately aluminium coated in material that isn't wholly recyclable, they said, let's end-to-end disrupt it. Let's invest in innovation and create a product that is end-to-end recyclable. And not only that, stops plastic getting into our oceans, because we're investing in circular economy innovation. And so the team there are a young, dynamic team that have pushed every single boundary you can think of when it comes to making sure that their product is sustainable. And I know lots of people usually jump to the big guns like the Patagonias of this world, but I actually think it's going to be the challenger brands of the ocean bottles that, because in some people's language, are born good, and they realise that doing the innovation early on before you even launched is integral to ensuring that you can be as good as you possibly can be. And I think that's the future, actually, and their growth will be faster than a lot of companies that we've seen.
It's really interesting you say that, Natalie, because actually when I was sort of thinking about this, preparing for this podcast, I was struggling to think of one organisation, sort of big name brand that I'd hold up. Impsons is one that I personally feel has done a fantastic job in terms of education and employment, and how it's providing employment opportunities for ex-offenders, a really tricky group of people to try and engage, but has built a fantastic business model around that. My other personal favourites are someone like Luminary Bakery has had a huge amount of my business over the last amount of lockdown, sending letterbox brownies to friends and relatives around. And they're also actually a partner that Deloitte works with and supports. But their letterbox brownies, for anyone who's not tried them, are definitely worth investing in.
And this may be an opportune moment for the advert, which normally runs out around Luminary Bakery, to be plugged into the episode.
Did you know at Deloitte we support social enterprises through our 5 Million Futures programme? One of my favourites is Luminary Bakery in London. They use baking as a tool to take women on a journey to employability and entrepreneurship, equipping them with transferable skills for the working world. Their letterbox brownies are incredible, and they even have a cookbook. If you fancy a taste, just head to luminarybakery.com or check out the show notes. Now back to our topic of the day. So Natalie, I know that today Belu has invested over 5 million in bringing clean water, decent toilets and good hygiene to everyone everywhere with WaterAid. Can you talk a bit more about that partnership? And Claire, if you talk a bit about the partners that you've worked with in your role as well.
Yeah, so our WaterAid partnership is one that I am deeply proud of. At this stage, I've only been at Belu 3 years, so I cannot take any credit. But Belu started as an environmental brand. It started life as a brand that wanted to knock every single non-UK water off the table at a hospitality business. And over time, actually, to the conversation we're having, realised that there was also more that could be done to bring clean water to communities all over the world that don't have that basic human right. And so our partnership with WaterAid has been going for 10 years. We celebrated our 10th anniversary just last week. And what we do with them is we give them unrestricted funding. So over 5 million to date, but unrestricted funding to really get into the communities that others don't necessarily think of as part of their funding mix. And so generally it might be other corporates where they have a connection to a specific country or specific territory. So for us at Belu, we go where the need is greatest. And what we're also doing with WaterAid now is aligned to our new purpose of changing the way the world sees water, broadening that conversation out of water poverty into how do we think about water as part of the climate movement? How do we get businesses to be thinking about their water usage, to be thinking about a circular economy, to be thinking about waste and materials to ensure that they don't end up in oceans, seas, lakes, waterways. And so the other bit of our impact that's sort of sat separately to WaterAid was everything that we're doing around being carbon neutral and climate change. And so for a lot of people, this conversation centers around net zero. Whilst that framework's been worked out, for us, it's just about maintaining our carbon neutral standard. And I think we're the only drinks business that's PAS 20 recognised as being carbon neutral. So it's not a sort of a glossy, we're doing this over here and we're just offsetting it all. Actually, end-to-end processes are being refined to ensure that we achieve that BSI PAS 2060 accreditation.
We have our kind of ambition to make a difference to 5 million futures, and we can't do that on our own. Our kind of network of charities, social enterprises and schools that we work with are kind of integral in terms of helping us achieve that mission. So we have 70 different organisations that we work with across the UK, generally aligned to local offices. We work with Teach First and their partner schools who work with kind of some of the most schools with the highest proportion of young people on free school meals, which is a definition for disadvantaged. We've got 26 different partner schools across the country that we work with in that space. The charities that we work with, some of our big charities are the likes of Mind, Prince's Trust, Scope. And actually the way that we work with them, yes, we fundraise for them because, charities do need money. But actually the thing that we do that makes the biggest difference is we use our skills and expertise to help them thrive as organisations and increase their impact. So some good examples that we've been working with Mind and Scope around their commercial strategy. Charities have taken a huge hit over the pandemic. Fundraising, the fund runs that we've talked about have dried up. They're not getting that kind of revenue. So they're going to have to really innovate and think differently about how they make money. And Deloitte is in a really good position to kind of help them think that through. The other thing we support is social enterprise. And actually, this is how I know Belu and Natalie. And it was before Natalie's time, but Belu were one of the organisations we work with way back, probably a good 5 or 6 years ago. And again, we supported you, I think, around your strategy, your customer segmentation at that point. So we try and use our skills and expertise to really make a difference. The other thing that we've kind of been supporting our charities through the pandemic is we've talked about digital divide and actually the real challenge around access to laptops and technology and how divisive that has been actually for a lot of people. So those that are most segregated in society have then also been cut off even further by the fact that they don't have access to a laptop or they don't have the money to be able to afford the broadband fees. So Deloitte has made a commitment to donating 7,500 of our laptops. So the laptops that we have, that we use for our people, repurpose them and then send them out through our charities, through our schools to those that really need it. So for us, those partners are critical in terms of helping us achieve our mission, but also in terms of helping us engage with those people that really need it on the ground.
First, certain organisations, Belu is a good example, I suppose, Natalie, where it's fairly, it's fairly easy to identify the problem which Belu wants to be a champion of. But how with so many different issues, you've got societal issues, you've got sustainability issues. How does a corporate make that decision to focus on one area to become a responsible business of?
I don't think for a large business it has to be one issue, because if you ultimately think about the operating model, if you've got people in your business, it can be something just to do with issues that affect large parts of the population or society. Depending on the thing that you sell, you can distill it down to a raw material that's a key component of the business. Depending on the service, it can be looking at changing employment standards within it. I really think, I don't actually think it's that difficult. What I think it takes is businesses to sit down and say, okay, what is the thing that we exist to do? Strip it back to the core component parts. What's our strategy for the next 3, 5, 10 years? And where does it make sense for us to start having a conversation? Where do we have influence? What are our levers? What would be so organic for us to talk about that it doesn't feel like the add-on? Because that's when it doesn't work. It can't be the additional thing. It can't be the nice to have. And once that conversation has been had, that strategic design of, okay, this is where we're going to focus and this is how long we're going to do it for, is so much easier and people get it instinctively.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think for me, it's authenticity. You've got to be authentic in terms of what you're trying to do. And certainly when I think about kind of Deloitte, we're a people business. We've got 20,000 people within our organisation. So the thing that made a huge amount of sense for us to kind of invest and work on is that skills, education, employment angle. We're really good at supporting people through their careers. So how can we do that to the benefit of society? And that's kind of where our 5 Million Futures programme has really kind of gained traction and has really kind of made a difference, because it's what matters to us. And it's the thing we're best at, actually. And it's the thing that we can therefore harness and support other organisations with. So I also think that without that authenticity, it's never going to stick. And equally, people will see through you, straight away. The term greenwashing is there for a reason, because people very quickly can see if you're trying to dip your toe into something that it's just a way of trying to make your brand look better, rather than it's something that's actually core to who you are, what you're trying to achieve, and how you're trying to make money.
I think the perfect Venn diagram is what matters to us, what matters to society, and what can we actually change.
Yeah.
And it's that sweet spot. So I think that's the other bit, right? Which is where the influence comes in. What can a business actually change? And that's both the internal appetite and the external appetite. And we can all think about businesses that have gone on a big, bold journey of trying to change something, but actually the investors, shareholders, board, exec weren't really engaged with it. And it wasn't a hot government agenda or a wider societal agenda. And so it just sort of falls to the wayside quietly. I
think around climate in particular and sustainability in particular, we're in a bit of a potential tipping point, aren't we? It's becoming quite politicized as a topic. And once the politicians get involved, then others might start switching off, sort of thing. And I'm sure there's been plenty of great examples of businesses and organisations who've done a tremendous amount of progress around these important issues. But for how do we sort of balance that message? Because that it'll be very easy for that greenwashing accusation to come through as corporates are trying to align with political agendas. What are the consequences for not getting on the bandwagon?
I think there's going to be a contradiction. I know there is going to be a contradiction between the narrative of global governments around climate and what they actually want in terms of growth and GDP. So a good example is, we're seeing all of these trade deals being signed and headlines are talking about New Zealand beef and lamb, things you can already get on the shelves. But, the consumer will go, why am I buying lamb that has been shipped from the furthest part of the world for my dinner when I can either not buy lamb, or I can buy lamb that has been sourced much closer to home? And I'm in the world of water, where now it is absolutely absurd to me that someone would be sitting at a table drinking water that has been extracted from somewhere in the Alps or flown in from Fiji or shipped in from somewhere else, when you can drink tap water, you can drink filtered water, or you can drink water that has been sourced within the UK. And people did it before because, it's part of the luxury experience or it tastes better. And I just don't think people are buying that anymore. But that's what I mean in terms of this is where the contradiction is going to come in, because we're going to hear lots of things about importing and exporting and, buying X from Y country, when the reality is that if you are thinking more sustainability focused, and you're thinking about the environment and you're thinking about provenance, starting closer to home is always where the biggest bang for buck is.
I think we've touched on the pandemic a couple times, and George also mentioned our Millennial and Gen Z survey. I think one of the statistics that stood out to me was that 72% of Millennials and Gen Zs, they actually fear that business commitment to combat climate change will be reduced as a result of the pandemic, because of all the challenges that businesses have to deal with to stay afloat. Do you think that's a legitimate concern? Or
what I am hearing people say, though, is where they were going on a journey pre the pandemic and they had to switch for multiple reasons, they are committed to going back as soon as it's financially feasible to, or from a health and safety perspective, it's viable to. And so the businesses that got it anyway will continue on the journey. The businesses that didn't really want to do it will use this as an excuse not to pursue the strategy that they may have started.
I think the other thing, Ethan, actually, there's huge amounts of positives, isn't there? Like, we've all had to travel a lot less. And I know, certainly Deloitte is looking at our own travel policy and thinking about how can we take what we've learned through this and really build back in a different way, do something different in terms of how we travel and support our clients. There's adverts around local producers who haven't been able to get their goods and services in from abroad, have had to find local producers. So, it's those things. I think there's also been a huge amount of positives, and I think we'll probably see progress. It might feel like there's been a bit of a hole, but actually I think it's been a really good point of reflection.
Mm-hmm. And do you think the shift to working from home and more hybrid working patterns, do you think that will make it more difficult for businesses to empower their people to continue making an impact? And how can they support them to continue to do that?
I certainly think from a Deloitte side, we've had to rethink how we help our people empower. And like anything, it's then involved an amount of innovation and new ways of our people engaging and supporting those that need our help. So we recently ran a volunteering month whereby we engaged 1,500 Deloitte people across the country to support individuals in a whole range of different ways. So anything from debating with young people in schools, building their confidence, expertise, through to helping 16 to 25-year-olds with their CVs or interview skills practice or think about where they want to go. And that has had a huge impact on our people, those that have participated in it. Have fed back to us how much they enjoyed it, how good it was for their own mental health. You know, it's been tough on people's mental health, working from home, not engaging with huge amounts of people, but how doing something like volunteering, helping someone else can also make a huge difference to you as an individual. But it's also had a huge impact on those people that we've been able to support. And I think what that pandemic has done has also allowed us to really think about where we can support those people. So historically, our strategy has been very office focused because that was the geography in which our people were kind of operating. Now that's all gone out the window. So we launched a program, actually a reading program with an organisation called TutorMate, which is allowing our people to read with primary school children in Bradford. Now, Bradford isn't somewhere we've got an office, but it's an area that needs support and help and assistance. I think the pandemic will really help open up those areas of the UK, particularly that have maybe suffered from lack of business engagement because of where they're focused, because of the history of that space, and allow companies to make much more of an impact in an easier way, because all it takes is someone having a computer and an ability to kind of log on, which, we should not take that for granted. That in itself is a whole big challenge. But I do think that has opened up a whole different raft of support for people that maybe wasn't there previously.
I would agree. Belu is it's a small team of 12. But what I have observed in the sort of the remote working context that we have, and for context, I joined Belu on the 2nd of March, 2020. I met my team once in person, and then I had to ultimately build a new culture, go through crisis management, reset a strategy, all virtually. And I didn't see them again in person until September. And even now, I would say we're still on a handful of actual face-to-face meetups. And what's powerful there is where people used to show up with a sort of professional front, this is who I am, and you sort of leave yourself behind at home, you're beamed into people's homes. And so automatically people are showing up as more authentic selves. I think most organizations move to create a really flexible environment and a more supportive environment that possibly didn't exist in the old world. I know that for us at Belu, it really was about taking time to understand and check in and make sure everyone was okay. And we created this idea of the gift of time. Everyone was really busy pre me joining, and there was no time to think about strategy or do anything new. And actually, with the gift of time, we could look at all of the things that had never sort of risen to the top of the what if strategy list, and also fix all the BAU things that, again, didn't get to the top of the list because there was never any time. And so we did that, which gave us a brilliant runway to be able to launch new products, to open up in a new territory at the start of this year. And I think the other thing, to Claire's point, in terms of getting out into new communities, when you remove the boundaries and the walls of an office environment and say, actually, as a role, this is what you do and you can do it anywhere, you give people an opportunity to move back to possibly where they grew up and become a part of a community that they've wanted to be a part of but could never possibly afford, or where the opportunity wasn't there. And so if you then think about the long-term impact of what that does from a social mobility perspective, aspirations, the shift within schools, I don't think we're going to fully appreciate the cultural change that the remote working that hopefully is here to stay in some way, shape or form will have on the UK.
I think that's a fascinating point. I haven't appreciated the social mobility impact of this, but you can 100% see it, because people need role models. People need individuals around them and opportunity. And all of the opportunity was in the big cities in the previous world. And now you can be anywhere and work for anyone. And I think for young people, that will be hugely empowering to think about, okay, I can do whatever I want to do. I am not constrained by geography, which hopefully we'll see a huge improvement then in terms of social mobility.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely spot on, really. And yes, the millennial survey, which is out this month, which this is a global survey of 23,000 millennials and Gen Zs across 45 countries. I think in that it had stats including, I think, 35% of millennials and 39% of Gen Zs have already decided the type of work and the type of organizations they want to work for, based, purely on ethical beliefs, really. And I think that's, all of this, the context of all of the last year and a half, nearly, isn't it? People have just had that time to really reflect and engage on, what is most important for that. That work-life balance is more important than ever, really. And actually, to Claire, I took part in the Futures Month, the Volunteers Month you mentioned, and I got involved in the debating, which is fantastic. And it was a virtual call. Yeah, I'm here in my bedroom in Kent, sort of helping out a school in London, and it's just fantastic that actually that opportunity's been been available despite us all working remotely. So, but actually, I'd like to ask you, how it obviously still requires quite a lot of people's time, a lot of workers' time, I suppose. How important is volunteering in all of this?
I think from my perspective, it's a part of a puzzle. It's important, I think, to your employees. I think it's really important to our employees to have that space and opportunity to feel that they're giving back. But I think what's much more powerful than volunteering is actually them doing that in every aspect of their role, so that they feel like their role has real purpose holistically. Volunteering is a nice additional piece that might take them slightly outside of their comfort zone, help them use their skills with a group of people that they might not normally come across. But unless they're doing it in their core day-to-day role, feeling like they're making a difference, all of those positive benefits we've talked about of being a responsible business will feel a bit inauthentic, I think.
There's not literally, I was nodding away, because that has been one of the primary things for me at Belu, making sure that everyone is in a role that gives them the most amount of intellectual stretch, interest, where they feel committed and aligned to our purpose, and where they wake up every day and the work they do is fulfilling and has meaning. And then everything else that we do really is the icing on the cake. But if the role does not fulfill in that way, then for me, that would have been a failure on my part as a CEO.
A great example of that, George, actually, is the Public Sector Social Value Act that came in earlier this year. And that has required all public sector, all organisations contracting with the public sector to think about really clearly the social value they're going to bring as part of that contract. And that is us really taking a hard look at every public sector contract and thinking, okay, what are we trying to deliver here? How can we do that to the benefit of society? And how can we do more to increase the social value? And I think it's things like that are, back to probably some of our earlier points, those are going to start really changing the game in terms of how we can make a difference in society, because that's a huge tranche of work support. And it 100% is the right thing to be doing.
Yeah, and we've talked about some wide-ranging topics, but one thing that we haven't really touched on yet is some of the social justice movements that have happened over particularly the past 12 months, when it comes to kind of Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate, and these, a lot of them focused around diversity and inclusion. So I guess just be worth hearing your thoughts on how you think attitudes have changed towards that in both the businesses you work in as well as the partners that you work with, and also how businesses can reflect and embed more inclusive practices throughout the work that they do.
So from a Deloitte perspective, I think it was a very good moment of reflection and time for us to think about, look at what we were doing in these spaces and look at our inclusion strategy and make sure we were doing enough. And I think, look, the short answer to that was there was a lot more to be done. From a societal engagement perspective, I think through engaging with societal organisations, what you're getting through that connection is a really broad range of individuals within society that you're working with and you're supporting. And particularly if you're then thinking about how you can work with them commercially, how you can bring them into your supply chain, you're by definition then kind of widening up the diversity of who you work with. But I think, there's always huge amounts more to do on the diversity and inclusion space. We've been working with Blueprint for All, who are the former Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust, and they were a new partner that we took on last year. And we've been helping them. They provide services to disadvantaged young people across the country. And we've been helping them improve their digital capability through our core services. So how can we help them get them really great services online to reach more people? That in itself is making a really big difference to those young people, and is that a way in which kind of diversity inclusion we are learning a huge amount from working with them. They're also supporting us on our own bursary program in terms of bringing people into the business. So it's a kind of mutually beneficial relationship. But I think, Ethan, back to your kind of question, I think diversity and inclusion and responsible business should be hand in hand. An effective, efficient organisation needs to take diversity and inclusion extremely importantly and make sure that they have a diverse range of people, of views, of opinions, because in order to, if you don't have that, again, you'll be going down quite a narrow route. You won't be looking at the bigger picture, and you'll only be servicing a smaller subset of society.
Yeah, and I guess it adds another facet to that definition of what it means to be a responsible business, that internal piece around culture and how you treat your employees and the fairness of opportunity that you give to them.
Definitely.
Well, there's just a different slant on that, and I'm going to add Me Too into it, even though it's been a bit longer since that happened. I think there was a culture in business specifically of tolerating poor behaviour and tolerating people being excluded, tolerating people ultimately being disrespected within a working environment. And even if it wasn't tolerated, people didn't necessarily have the means or mechanisms to say this behaviour is wrong. And I think the shift over the last couple of years, and definitely sped up as a result of the Black Lives Matter movement, is firstly a conversation to say there are behaviours in society that just cannot continue. For businesses to have an honest, hard look at themselves and think about what side of history and which end of the spectrum they want to be. What I would say is that when specifically race is a very uncomfortable topic for a lot of people. And I'm not convinced that we will move forward in terms of racial equality in the same way that we have made strides in gender equality and people understanding the dynamics of sexual harassment in the workplace or bullying in the workplace. But where I think the importance lies is that previously you couldn't have a conversation about it. Now you can have a conversation about it, and it's starting that dialogue. And exactly to Claire's point, businesses, the forward-thinking businesses, are realizing that these aren't separate, disparate, business issues or conversations. It's part of being a purposeful business, and it's part of being a business that's still going to be around in 3 years' time. So you need to be thinking about sustainability. You need to be thinking about inclusion. You need to be thinking about creating an equitable workplace. You need to be thinking about cultures and practices that enable everyone to show up and be treated fairly and be treated with respect and know that they have a voice should they not experience something as they expect it to be. And there are lots of examples of companies that are doing that, which provide a blueprint for others to follow. If you don't know what to do, just copy, just imitate. That's the easiest way to start.
No, I think that's that's excellent advice anyway. But I think it's spot on to, identify that the things which sort of bother us at home or the things that concern us at home, also apply in the workplace. And I think that's been a transition over recent years to think about.
And also our home is our workplace.
Exactly. Yeah, it's even more relevant. I imagine it is quite challenging for a CEO or a decision maker to weigh up that. Do I give all my staff new laptops so that they're going to be more efficient, or do we reinvest that into our social enterprises that we're passionate about? Or perhaps the answer is that, as we've already identified, that it's about linking the two. Is that fair, Natalie?
Yeah, and I think it. I dispute. It's not difficult. It's not difficult. It just is. You make the decision that it is the only way you will show up is doing good and making money. And the framework that I put into place when I joined Belu after we'd had some thinking time is purpose, people, product, and then profit. Because even social enterprises can put profit first at the expense of lots of other things. And so in saying we exist and we are driven wholeheartedly by our purpose, which is now to change the way the world sees water, every single decision comes back to that. Are we doing that one thing? I've already spoken about our articles and the other things that we've changed. Then we align our people into delivering that purpose. And so it's distilling it into what does everyone that works within Belu, what do they do every day? How does our supply chain need to behave, respond, react? What do they need to be thinking about their own policies, infrastructure, carbon footprint, supply chain, understanding of the circular economy? Then we move out of people into product. It's then really sweating that on what we sell and the services we offer. And what I said to the team is if we focus on those three pillars, the profit will return. We will be a business that can stand up and show we are making money in a wholly sustainable way so that it's not possible for business to turn around one day and say, it's just not possible, which is definitely a conversation I had 10 years ago when I started a very good company. It's definitely a conversation most people were having 5 years ago. We can't give our investors decent returns if we're also being philanthropists and looking after our people or paying the national living wage. Goodness, no, we cannot pay the national living wage and still, make people more wealthy. It's absolute rubbish. And the benefit of the last year is that we are realizing if we don't look after the person next to us, and if that's the minimum thing that we can't do, then, what's it all for?
I think looking at kind of even Deloitte's services and products that we supply, I've noticed a huge change in terms of the types of services and support that we are now providing out to those consumer businesses, because that's what the market's demanding and that's what the market needs. So things like sustainable finance, support around path to net zero, helping organisations think through how they're going to look at their ethical supply chain. So consumers are really businesses are starting to recognise that they have to do this and they want to do this. I probably slightly, I can see from Natalie's perspective, yes, I think it shouldn't be hard, but I think it is quite hard to make a transition. I think organisations struggle transitioning from being solely profit driven to then start to think about how can I make sure that the profit I am making is in balance with the social good I'm creating. And I think, that is going to take time, rightly or wrongly. Ideally we'd probably throw out the rule book and everyone would start again. And actually, if you think back to it, when companies were invented in the Victorian times, that's how they were invented. The likes of Cadbury's was set up to support its local society. So actually it's not a change. It's a really long shift back to where we used to be. But I think, it's a change that needs to happen and happen quickly.
So we normally wrap these up with the final question. I think it's going to be a short answer, but I'll ask it anyway. So can a business make money and do good at the same time?
Yes.
100% yes. And I think it's a key way that organisations are going to kind of survive, thrive, attract talent, investors, customers going forward.
Great. And thanks so much for joining us. That was incredibly insightful.
Yeah, Natalie and Claire, thank you so much for that. Yeah, really, really great conversation.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. We'll be back next time with another big question. This podcast is produced by our very own pod squad and hosted by George Parrett, Lizzie Elston and Ethan Worth. Thanks to our creative studio for their technical support. Original music by Ali Barrett from our consulting team.